No one outside a small room in Norfolk knew the ship's name when the order was given. To the public, it was another rusted Russian tanker limping through the North Atlantic under false registry. To the analysts watching satellite feeds, it was something else. A floating decoy carrying a hidden weapons container and a detachment of Russian special forces. The operation to take it would never appear in any Pentagon briefing. It would be buried under a line item marked Maritime Enforcement Activity, January. What happened in the next 5 hours would reshape every naval interception protocol from Scotland to the Barents Sea. At 2:47 Greenwich Mean Time, the USS Ticonderoga detected a faint radar signature southeast of the Iceland Gap. The contact showed inconsistent navigation lights, transmitting an outdated transponder code registered to a vessel scrapped 2 years earlier. The signal was traced to the tanker RFS Corona, flagged to a shell company in Cyprus, but under temporary Russian registry. Intelligence indicated that on board were 12 personnel from the 346th Naval Spetsnaz Brigade and an unknown weapons system marked Project Meridian. The USN's 5th Special Operations Detachment was already airborne. Weather over the region had turned brutal. Wind gusts at 45 knots, waves cresting above 10 meters. That was why the Corona had chosen this sector. Radar clutter was dense, and electronic surveillance from British stations in the Faroe Islands was intermittent. At 3:12, the P-8 Poseidon orbiting from Lossiemouth confirmed heat signatures on deck. 6 crew, motion concentrated near the aft cargo hatch. The infrared camera picked out the angular outline of a container roughly the size of a missile launch module. The ship was moving slowly at 8 knots, course north-northeast toward the Norwegian basin. Command ordered immediate interdiction. The insertion team, 12 operators from Delta's Maritime Assault Troop, launched from a CV-22B Osprey, staged on the USS Wasp, call sign Raven 1. The plan was a low hover-fast rope onto the stern deck before the Corona crossed into the Russian-declared surveillance zone. The tanker's crew would not be warned. A support element from the British RFA Tide Force coordinated radar masking with their own signal emissions, simulating a trawler cluster to confuse any long-range sensors. At 3:29, Raven 1 crossed into the storm's central cell, flying just 20 meters above wavetops to avoid surface radar. The Corona's electronic suite was not idle. Hidden inside a false fuel tank was a compact EW module adapted from the Krasuka 4 system. When the Osprey closed within 2 kilometers, its radar altimeter began to fluctuate, displaying phantom readings. The pilot switched to manual and held altitude by visual reference to the water's reflection. Lightning illuminated the ship for half a second, enough for the gunners to see the tanker's deck lights flick off completely. The captain had gone dark. Within 10 seconds, tracer fire arced upward from the stern. The Osprey's port door gun returned fire with a minigun burst that shredded the guardrail. 2 figures went down. The fast rope insertion began under contact. The first 4 operators hit the deck behind the superstructure, cutting through the crosswind. Their infrared goggles showed silhouettes moving along the starboard side carrying rifles. One of the Spetsnaz operators fired a flare, washing the deck in orange light. The Americans sprinted for cover behind a winch assembly. The second stick dropped moments later, landing amid scattered brass casings and spilled diesel. Within 2 minutes, the deck was under U.S. control. 3 Russians were lost, 1 wounded. The remainder had retreated into the engine compartment. Overhead, the Osprey circled with navigation lights off, its rotor wash scattering sheets of spray. The assault team's priority was the cargo. According to intercepted Russian naval messages, Project Meridian was a stabilized pulse array designed to jam low-orbit reconnaissance satellites for brief intervals, effectively creating a blackout bubble over a chosen area. The container was sealed with magnetic locks powered by an internal generator. Sergeant McConnell connected the portable cutting unit, but the lock housing was reinforced titanium. It would take 30 minutes to breach. Command authorized use of shape charges, but ordered all data drives to be preserved intact. The team split. half securing engineering, half working on the container. The clock was running. At 3:58, a new threat appeared. A Russian Yasen-class submarine surfaced briefly 20 nautical miles south, transmitting encrypted bursts on military frequencies. The British frigate HMS Portland picked it up and relayed the contact to U.S. European Command. The submarine's presence confirmed what analysts feared. The Corona was bait. The Spetsnaz team aboard was tasked not with delivery, but with delay, stalling until the submarine could retrieve the weapon or destroy the tanker outright. Command ordered Raven 1 to maintain station for extraction readiness, but not to engage the submarine unless fired upon. Inside the Corona, the firefight continued in the engine corridor. The American point man kicked open a door and was met by a flashbang that deafened half the team. When vision cleared, 2 Russian operators were down, another fled toward the control room. He was carrying a detonation trigger. McConnell's voice cut through comms. They're rigging the core. The decision was immediate. The team bypassed the corridor and entered through an exterior access panel using thermite. Within seconds, they breached into the control compartment. The Russian commander, later identified as Captain Viktor Orlov, was kneeling beside a console wired with plastic explosives. He reached for the trigger, but froze at the sight of laser dots crossing his chest. By 4:11, the Corona was secure. 4 Russian operators lost, 5 captured, 3 missing, presumed overboard. Orlov was restrained and sedated. The shape charge on the container had burned through one layer. Beneath it, they found a smaller capsule with fiber conduits leading to a power array. The onboard technical officer identified it as a miniaturized reactor core, evidence that the system could power electromagnetic emissions for days without refueling. The order came from Norfolk. Deactivate, extract, sink the vessel. The Americans worked fast. Data drives were removed, the core disabled with a circuit cutter, and the container sealed. At 4:27, the weather worsened. Wind speeds hit 50 knots. Extraction by helicopter became nearly impossible. Raven 1 was recalled to the Wasp, leaving only a backup HH-60 on standby. The team improvised. Using the tanker's own launch boat, they secured the container to a flotation cradle and deployed a homing beacon. The USS Ticonderoga maneuvered to within 1 nautical mile for retrieval. Meanwhile, charges were planted along the Corona's keel to ensure it would sink once abandoned. By 04:45, the assault team had moved to the lifeboat and begun evacuation. The tanker's deck lights flickered once, then went dark as power failed. 2 minutes later, an unexpected transmission cut through the storm. It was an automated distress beacon from the Russian submarine, now only 8 nautical miles away. Analysts realized what had happened. The sub had surfaced too quickly in heavy seas and suffered mechanical failure. The Portland confirmed the sonar signature of flooding in its forward ballast section. The Americans ignored the beacon. Their priority remained exfiltration. Yet the situation created a narrow diplomatic gap. Russia could not publicly protest the tanker's capture, while its own submarine was compromised nearby. The decision was made to classify the entire incident under maritime accident protocols. At 5:06, as dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, the charges aboard the Corona detonated. The blast was muffled by wind, but visible from the Ticonderoga's bridge as a brief orange bloom followed by black smoke. The tanker broke in half and began to list starboard. The American lifeboat drifted 200 meters away, engines off to avoid detection. Debris rained into the water. Metal fragments, oil drums, shattered railing. Within 10 minutes, the ship was gone. Only a slick of diesel marked its last position. The homing beacon from the container pinged steadily, its signal cutting through the static of the storm. The interrogation of Captain Orlov began aboard the Ticonderoga's medical bay 3 hours later. The Russian officer refused to speak, citing the Geneva Convention and demanding contact with the Russian embassy in Oslo. Instead, analysts extracted data from his personal encrypted tablet recovered during the search. The contents revealed something larger. a network of disguised cargo ships moving similar components under commercial cover, each designated to a different maritime corridor. Project Meridian was not a prototype. It was the third operational module in a series designed to disable Western reconnaissance before major naval movements. Orlov's silence no longer mattered. The files spoke for him. At 9 o'clock, a secure call between the Pentagon and the British Ministry of Defense confirmed joint custody of the captured weapon. The container was flown under heavy guard to a secure facility in Suffolk for forensic analysis. Satellite imagery from the wreck site showed no remaining debris except minor oil discharge. Russian media reported a technical malfunction aboard a supply vessel and denied any military presence. Within 24 hours, the incident disappeared from all official channels. Only a single paragraph in a maritime safety bulletin mentioned loss of a commercial tanker during adverse weather north of the Shetland sector. For the American team, debrief lasted 2 days. Each operator wrote a classified statement recounting sequence, weapons fired, and number of combatants neutralized. The final after-action report listed the operation as successful with no friendly casualties. The phrase concealed the exhaustion and risk behind it. Satellite photos later showed that Russian reconnaissance aircraft conducted multiple overflights of the area, but by then the container and its reactor were already dismantled in a hangar under U.S. Air Force jurisdiction. What remained of the Corona lay 600 meters below the surface, its hull cracked open like a split artery, leaking rust into the dark. Weeks later, intelligence intercepts caught fragments of Russian military traffic referencing Operation Typhoon Shield, a program intended to shield naval task groups from surveillance for brief windows. The destruction of the Corona halted it indefinitely. The captured data revealed that similar systems were being shipped through Arctic routes disguised as oil equipment. NATO Command established a permanent task group to monitor all Russian commercial vessels transiting the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. Every radar echo, every transponder glitch, every ship sailing dark would now trigger automatic investigation. The silent front of electronic warfare had entered the open ocean. The final phase of the operation remained classified until months later when a sanitized briefing leaked to Allied agencies. It confirmed that the Corona's reactor core had been safely neutralized, that Captain Orlov remained in custody, and that no radioactive contamination had occurred. What it omitted was the last message transmitted by Raven 1's flight lead before returning to the Wasp. It was a single line recorded at 5:22 that morning. Target neutralized. Ocean clean. To the men who had hung on ropes in freezing wind over a hostile deck, that was enough. The mission had ended exactly where it began, in silence, between the waves, unseen by the world.